Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever. And with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security with Invicti, the zero-noise application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API. With unparalleled accuracy, coverage, and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. Invicti, AppSec with zero noise. Visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Josh Goldberg about how TypeScript helps make code safer. See, he also said that we should mess up less, which I'm demonstrating live for you right now. But the other things Josh told us about was how TypeScript helps make code safer and more readable for devs dealing with JavaScript, whether it's front-end or back-end work. I'm your host, Mike Shima, who will mess up less. I'm here with John Kinsella and Akira Brand, and it's just about time for the news. But first, one announcement. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on the RSA Conference 2023 Full Conference Pass. RSA Conference will take place April 24th through 27th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC2023 and use the code 53UCyber. We'll see you there. John, Akira, we've got a bit of an off-the-wall question from a listener this week in our AP I Don't Know section. It starts, aside from ABBA, what famous things have come from Sweden?
Okay, I have one, but it's not really software, but I thought we were all talking about our playlists today, so I just came up with a band that's one of my favorite bands.
Oh, yeah.
So this band is called Opeth. They're a Swedish death metal band. I'm really into death metal, which is kind of surprising to some people. Yeah, they've been around since 1990. They have like a lot of prog rock influences in there. If you like Jethro Tull and you like metal, you will love Opeth. So check them out. Great death metal band from Sweden, Opeth.
Waiting for their Aqua Black Lung cover.
Oh, I bet they do. I bet they have one.
John,
even better.
John, I don't know if you have anything famous from Sweden?
The monkey wrench. The adjustable wrench came from Sweden. How about that?
Oh, all right. That is actually good. And excellent on brand for a hardware reference. This is John always bringing hardware into the AppSec show. Like Akira, I was thinking of music as well. You know, there's ABBA, I love Roxette, and also one of my other favorite bands from Sweden, Covenant. But speaking of things that start with the letter C, I think what this is going for is curl. Today, March 20th, is the 25th anniversary of libcurl, created by or maintained by Daniel Stenberg. And libcurl is probably the premier tool out there for dealing with a protocol, a web protocol specifically like HTTP, HTTPS, but it supports a whole bunch of others. And I really just wanted to highlight it for a few reasons. One, it's a wonderful tool. It appears everywhere. Daniel has curated a project over 25 years that has had almost 3,000 people contribute to it. And he has set up, I think, a great community, a great example of how to curate and maintain a community. If you look at the way that he interacts with developers, talking about bugs, the way he interacts on mailing lists is very positive. It's very supportive. And I think that's just a great thing to point to when we see what kind of project should be long-lived. And the final thing I'll point out too, curl starts with C and is written in C. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But John, maybe, let me see Akira, John, let's get some comments on curl first. And then John, you might have some, I think a rebuttal to bring to the table here.
I'll let Akira go first.
I'll just say two things about curl. The first is curl is one of the first tools I ever learned, and it blew my freaking mind. It's wonderful. I use it. I still use it quite a lot. And the second thing I want to say is that I'm not so great at time zones at this exact moment, but if you are around at 1700 UTC, there is a birthday party for curl going on. You can go just Google curl birthday party, and it's an open Zoom link, and you can drink some scotch and celebrate the 25 years of curl being alive.
Indeed, and go say thank you to Daniel. It's a wonderful work. And now John to bring us down.
Oh, my job here is about to be complete. Yeah, so 25th anniversary of curl, and as I was going through my news stories this morning and prepping for this, it looks like the curl folks, as in preparation for doing a new release, released a collection of new vulnerabilities over the weekend. So sort of, it's really interesting because Akira, I'm sort of shocked this is the first thing you learned. And I don't know how well you learned it. Don't mean that in a bad way, but like curl is one of those things. Libcurl, man, it's a Swiss Army knife when you start looking at these list of vulnerabilities which came out. So I think it's I want to say there's about 5 of them. I'm not going to go through all. I got all the links in the show notes. But they go everything from, let's see here, connection reuse, I believe, on FTP as well as with SSH, a double free vulnerability. There was an option injection vulnerability on Telnet. So Telnet has the ability, for those of us who have used Telnet back in the past, it at one point got high tech and added the ability to pass, say, like a username across, so you don't have to type your username in all the time and some other stuff like that. So there's option injection on there, and then as well as a FTP path resolution discrepancy. So while some of us think of curl as just pure HTTP, HTTPS, it's got all these other things in there. That's good and bad, right? I'm not too worried about C versus Rust, which I think we're going. I think we talked a week or two ago that some folks were working on rewriting this in Rust. But anytime you've got a any type of utility that supports so many different protocols, the curl crowd has done a great job with this. But still, you're really sort of expanding your ability to have some sort of a thing go bang in the night in there. So I don't think any of these are really desperate. We've got some better ones to talk about, but I thought this was sort of fun to throw in there. Like, we're all happy anniversary, and oh, by the way, there's some more vulnerabilities.
It never ends, indeed. And the ones you point out, memory issues, it's C, classic, another word that starts with C, this is going to happen. But yes, we've also seen re-entrancy bugs have been interesting because curl, written to be high performance and multi-threaded, and that is not necessarily easy to do. But the curl has done it, but as we heard from Josh, mess up less. It doesn't just happen in JavaScript, it can happen in C as well. Concurrency is tough. I think one final note I wanted to mention is that 1998, it was version 4.0. It took today 25 years to get to version 8.0. So if they're doing one thing wrong, it's just not marketing their version numbers strongly enough. 25 years to get 4 versions. Tisk, tisk, tisk. But John, you did say that we've got some more interesting flaws to talk about this week. So let's jump over to that. What caught your eye?
Let's see. I've got one. What do I want to save that one, or do we want to go somewhere else? Where do we plan our moves here? Let's hit it. You had a story there with Microsoft and Outlook and what could be 2023's IT bug. Want to tell us about that?
The it bug. Now, I don't necessarily agree that, this will be the it bug that everybody's talking about, but it is yet another example of poor Windows, PassTheHash. So if you're running a Microsoft Exchange server, which you're going to make John cringe and sigh if you're doing that in this day and age. We've talked about this in the past before. You shouldn't be. But if you are, you have some patches to apply. And this is interesting because it's the zero click is the fancy way, or a no interaction bug where you can receive an email, and even if the preview pane launches, Outlook is going to initiate an outbound connection, and it's going to send it's basically going to initiate an NTLm connection that's going to send your hash over that nice friendly SMB port 445, if you remember your trivia, and then you can take that hash, pass it around, and reuse it. So it's a very classic, very old school type of attack within Windows land, and this is just a new vector that could be targeted against Windows systems. So do point out that the risk is constrained to Windows systems using Microsoft Outlook and Exchange. This isn't going to necessarily be something from Linux or Mac OS. And the only other thing I'll point out too is that depending on how this is exploited, why are the networks also allowing outbound 445 from their networks? And I read an article this morning that was pointing out that they were, I think, defense contractors or important companies were being targeted with this. That made me think, wait, why? Shouldn't you be doing better? So I just had to rack my brains on that. I don't know, Akira, if this, if you were also banging your head as a death metal fan might do, but how you reacted to this.
Well, it wasn't really reacting to this. It was just I do that in general. My main thing that I took away from this is I had to learn what NTLm authentication is.
Oh, you poor thing. So sorry.
Yeah. a little rough. So it was interesting to me though that so for those of you who may not know, NTLm is a suite of Microsoft security protocols that does authentication and confidentiality for users. What I thought was interesting, and maybe I'm a little bit off here because this is so new to me, is that from what I'm reading, NTLm is actually not in favor anymore. It's like you want to use something like Kerberos or Azure. And so I was kind of like a little confused as to why this is still being used. So maybe the two of you can like maybe give me a little insight into that. Like, why are we still using NTLM when we should apparently be using something else?
John, you have to answer this first. Come on, I see you smiling.
Damn it, I don't want to. I'll let the editors cut out the dead air. How would I say? There is a collection of yes, we've moved on to better and newer technologies, either through suspicion that some users still might be using NTLM, or maybe for other reasons that the teams at Microsoft aren't turning these things off. I mean, that's the way I look at it, right? It's been around for quite a while. You're asking the magical question.
Yeah.
Between that and if you're running Exchange at home, or not at home, in your Office Enterprise, and why are you not doing outbound filtering? Come on, folks. Come on. And I know this stuff doesn't happen, and I know like it's very easy for me to sit here and talk about it, and we're all busy, but yeah, it's a thing, Akira, unfortunately. And we can hope and look at hardening guides and try to figure out how to set these things up correctly and make sure we pay attention to Patch Tuesday every month. But here we are.
Yeah, I think John hit that. I think the only other thing I'd add to that is I was aware that NTLM is basically gone by. It's been gone by the wayside and unnecessary for at least a decade plus, if not longer. But there's also a protected user security group that you can drop accounts into, and that will prevent them from using NTLM. So if
there's no bugs in that.
If there's no bugs, indeed. And the only reason I was going to mention that is there is Microsoft has done a masterful job of supporting backwards compatibility, but has come back to bite them in the sense that if you don't need to move off of NTLM because NTLM, things just work, I say in air quotes, it's sort of like, well, why aren't we just pushing and being forward thinking? So I think there's, Kira, probably, as you can tell, you asked a pretty fundamental question that if anybody could actually have solved that would have been a nice VC funded startup that would have fixed this problem a long time ago. But it's more of a culture, behavioral problems, I think, than just a pure technology. But speaking of technology problems, there's a couple other things, kind of small bugs that are wanted to pick on as well. Project Zero out of Google found some RCEs or potential for RCE in some modems used for like Wi-Fi calling or voice over LTE, and it was pretty cool work. What was just stood out to me is maybe the angle of looking at this from a supply chain perspective. So these chipsets are, as Project Zero calls it, internet to broadband or baseband. Basically, all you need to know is the victim's phone number, and you can pop their device. And their device could be, until it's fixed, a Pixel 6, Pixel 7, long list of anything that uses this Samsung chipset, as well as, and that was my dramatic pause, autos. And the only thing I could find was I think Volkswagen apparently is using some of these chipsets. But now just imagine of, all these OEMs that have to go and figure out what version of your handset, your cell phone, you need to update. Now you got to do this for 0 days on your autos. This is just not necessarily new for that area, but is a pretty stark reminder of it.
I'm glad you hit this one because I thought it'd be a fun segue to go from the previous zero-click article into the zero-click article. Yeah, this is super common. I've got one card that has a 3G modem that's no longer supported, and I'm too lazy to go and get it updated to a 4G. Oh, too lazy and money and whatever else. And then, just as an example on the tech side of this stuff, I was in a friend's car this weekend, an Audi Q5, and we stopped at a gas station to get, just fill up the tank, and I was going to be nice and wash the windshield. Turned out on the new Q5s that you actually can't pull up the window wiper to wash the windshield. So this was sort of no way, that can't be possible. So I did a little Googling, and they've got some sort of a attendant mode in the car. So you have to turn the car on, Don't start it. Turn it on, then turn it off, and then press down on the windshield wiper for about a second, and then all of a sudden, like the windshield wipers, like go up to the middle of the screen, and then you can clean the window. So the amount of tech which is coming into these cars, like we talk about Tesla and the CPUs and all this stuff, but like window wipers, just like it's sort of everywhere. So yeah, hopefully our window wipers won't have vulnerabilities pretty soon. But this stuff is sort of get the very strong. Don't worry about tinfoil hats. Just go straight to the armor and the chainmail. I think at this point.
For the benefit of our listeners, can one of you please describe what zero-click means?
Sure. I'll go to it from the point of view of like what the problem is. In modern vulnerabilities, modern attacks, one of the more difficult things that a attacker has to do. Say you find a vulnerability in something we've talked about today. We'll look at one of the curl things, right? To leverage that, you probably have to get someone to type out one of those curl commands which you learned, one of those wonderful things. Okay, well that's fine, but that requires either some amount of you have to get another script or some other toehold in the system to get them to actually execute that command, or you have to socially engineer them. Like, hey, I'm the VP. I need my bank account updated, so I need you to run this curl command if you're in that company, or whatever else is going on here, right? You have to get someone to run that. The holy grail for an attacker is if I can compromise your system without having you do anything. So I don't have you to the sort of the intermediate step here is when we're having some of the attacks which were coming out, say, a year or two ago would be like an SMS message, say like, here, click on this, and then it would somehow compromise you that way. Now they're able to do stuff with this modem vulnerability without having to without requiring the user to actually do anything. So it's much more easy to weaponize, much more easy to make money off of, and compromise and all those type of things.
Got it. So it's like being fooled without even being fooled because you're not even doing anything.
Yep. Don't have to be fooled.
Indeed.
Yep.
Indeed. And it's one of those things that's also, if we're talking about, as I was joking, and because I want to get rid of this mythology of developers don't care about security, it's also a zero click, is you can't really blame the user, because it's not, you can't say, well, they shouldn't have clicked on that link and they should have inspected the RFC 3986 or whatever it is to make sure it was a correctly crafted authority section of the URL. Then they should make sure that the path is correct and uses the right Unicode characters. It's more of just, you didn't even have to interact with the exploit payload, and they've been popped. And that's what was particularly dangerous about this, that Project Zero is pointing out, is that you also just need to know a phone number. So it's a great way if you want to target people. For example, we've seen targeted attacks, talking about SMS attacks with wallet holders in cryptocurrencies, things like that, doing other types of SIM swap. There's also one other small vulnerability, and then as I move us along, John, cropping things and redacting. This is kind of interesting. It has some, potential interesting. I say interesting, negative consequences for people who've relied on it.
Yeah. So, researcher, I think it's a real name. You always wonder when I see Twitter names. Simon Ahrens figured out on Android devices, there's a image editor in there. Fairly common for us. We take either a picture or something or a screenshot, and like before especially us nerds in the security world, we're going to redact out some part of it before we send it to a friend, or maybe just like, your ex significant others in the picture, or whatever reason you want to redact out some part of the screen, right? Black it out or color it different color or whatever you have. You get the idea. So this fellow, and I believe a friend, figured out that when they updated that software recently, and actually, I'm sorry, I haven't got into the details as much as I want to yet, but they figured out that they're able to reverse engineer what was redacted, not 100% of the time, but in many cases. So there's still information in that image that allows them to go through and actually get the data behind what was blacked out, what was actually marked out. So that's as deep as I dug into it, but I was hoping to get a little more time, and I was presuming there's some amount of AppSec in behind this type of thing, but you caught me with my research half done. So that's where I was on that one. It sort of blew up over the weekend. They've now got a website. What was it? Croplips.
Acropolis.app.
Thank you. Acropolis.app that allows you to you can go and upload an image from your Android device and see if it's able to actually figure out what you had tried to mark out. And but yeah, that was interesting and probably something for folks to think about. How do you, if you're going to do something like that? I imagine the first thought is, okay, obviously if you're using Photoshop layers or some sort of like TIFF layers, you might have like a layer on top and you just take off the layer, same as like the passwords in PDFs. But if you're doing this in a ping or some sort of image file, how do you do that accurately? Do you want to go through and erase things first and like be like, oh, we're a super secure version of like image modification? No one's going to buy that. But still, it's like, how do you do this and sort of take care of this in a safe manner? It's not a question we always think about, but still something obviously which could be quite important.
Indeed. And it just, the angle I was just going for there, as you kind of alluded to, was this: when you're offering potentially safety tools in terms of redacting, protecting the identity of people for whatever reasons, if that redaction can be lifted, can be reverse engineered, you're putting someone at risk when you didn't realize it, and it could be this third party that you're also impacting as well. So if you're providing safety, it must be safe and well tested. Now, we do have a couple of a theme of articles about making things better, and straddling things got worse, but maybe getting better is an article you had, Akira, about the SEC coming after a company.
Yes.
What happened here?
Yeah, so this was interesting because I read this article and then I had a nightmare about this article. And when I put two and two together, I was like, oh my God, I just had a nightmare about something I was going to do for ASW.
Wow.
So the nightmare that actually happened is there is this company called Blackbot Inc. and they do donor management for nonprofit organizations. And I don't know if either of you has worked in a nonprofit or if any of our readers have listened to worked in a nonprofit, but donor management tools are a really big deal. And if something goes sideways with that, like that's it, like your whole nonprofit could go under. So this is a really large deal that there was a vulnerability that was exploited with this company. So what essentially happened is that Blackbound had ransomware. And they announced that the ransomware attacker did not access donor bank account information or social security numbers back when they found out that this had been an issue. However, in a few days after that, the company's technology and customer relations personnel learned that the attacker had indeed accessed and exfiltrated these social security numbers and bank account information. Now, the thing that my nightmare was about, and that actually happened here in this article, is that there was no actual protocols for how to tell senior management that this had happened. And as such, it never got reported. And so I literally remember in this nightmare I was having, I was like, I knew something bad that had happened and I didn't know who to tell. And so I just like started like telling people in my company, and it like turned into like this whole thing, right? And this is a nightmare that did not actually happen. But yeah, so I wanted to highlight this because for the past 2 weeks we've talked about what is a good example of companies disclosing incidents and what are bad examples of companies disclosing incidents. And sometimes when I think of a bad example, it's like, oh, they just didn't disclose it at all, or they were like kind of shady with the details. But in this particular instance, they just genuinely didn't have the internal protocol set up to be able to report this up the chain. So what happened then is that later, this company, Blackbound, filed a quarterly report that omitted this very vital information, and as such, the SEC came after them later when they learned that this was in fact not true.
I mean, my first response on that is, even if you don't have those sort of some sort of a plan in place on how to do that, it seems like, and I know nothing about this case or the people involved, so I'm not trying to trash on people here, but that sounds like a massive management failure of like at several levels. I'm guessing people didn't have faith that they could go to their management and say, hey, this happened. So I'm guessing someone's playing hide-a-mole here, not whack-a-mole, but hide-a-mole. I don't know, that's just my guess. And that if you don't have that level of transparency and honesty with both your reports and with your management, that also leads to things like this, which is equally scary.
Indeed. I think it does seem dangerously close to the blame the intern, where this is more in the sense of we didn't even know we had an intern who was investigating, which I don't think I can add much more to what John said other than just repeating it. But this was a great example of what you pointed out, Akira, of one, don't lie through omission. And this is a good counterexample of what we like to see in transparency. And transparency doesn't mean you need to know everything up front. It means as you learn more details about a compromise, about a breach, you update, provide those details to the parties affected, or, in the way that's appropriate for what that occurrence was. So expanding, though, now into, let's try to end on more an optimistic note, perhaps. John, you've got
Turn to me.
something about C++, right?
Sure. I closed the tab, but yeah, it's this is an interesting one. So let's see. There's a group out there called Khronos, KHRO. That they're sort of a nonprofit working group, and they've done all sorts of really interesting projects. Let me see if I got their parent page around here. They've worked on things like OpenGL, I think VRML, definitely VR, and all sorts of different standards out there which are used cross organization, cross company. And one of the areas they've worked in, they've got this thing called SYCL, SYCL, which is fairly popular in the SC, supercomputing and high performance HPC areas. Getting all my acronyms. But so they have announced they're coming out with something called SYCL SC, which is not just for supercomputing, but it's also for safety critical. So we're overloading our acronyms here. But so what they're doing is, and this is really interesting. So this can be used either HPC from the point of view of large clusters of systems doing compute together, the more sort of classic scientific method of scientific, how shall I say, use of that phrase for universities and things like that, and now pharmaceuticals. But they're also expecting to see use for this in systems like cars. So it comes back to us talking about the car story and the baseband modems. So this is sort of the beginning of the project. They're putting together a working group. But what they're trying to do is take C++ as exists now with SYCL, this framework they have, and how can they actually add security concepts into that to make it more secure for those use cases. So I think it's for those of our listeners who are doing either educational or HPC, might be something to take a look at. So I thought I'd throw it in here to give people something to chew on.
It is really cool. And I like just seeing that, looking at C++ 17, so how the standard has been evolving, because C++ does have some great native support for atomics, memory management, concurrency, speaking of which also means that the compiler tool chain should be better about pointing out when there are problems. I think on the contrary, curl, I think, is still just focused on C99. Not that C itself language has added as many new capabilities as C++ has, but curl's made that choice to be pretty much build it anywhere, run it anywhere. So it makes sense for them to have chosen that approach. I wanted to tie your article into just a short one that I found about a brief overview about OpenSSH and its approach to sandboxing and privilege separation. And I prefaced it with the idea that it's always, I think, interesting to read about how different software projects approach security. So this could be something you learn either about threat model you weren't aware of. Maybe it's something about using C or using syscalls or using the capabilities of a system that the software is running on. And this talks about privilege separation that is basically using two different splitting pre-auth user verification across two different processes, doing IPC communications between them. That's something that a lot of browsers have done, so that if there is a memory management issue in your insecure C code in one process, that won't necessarily infect a more privileged process where you have secrets like cookies or passwords or things like that. And the other part was, it just talks about the sandboxing that is also here for helping protect the pre-auth shenanigans that OpenSSH has to go through, and pointing out systrace in Linux-based systems, seatbelt, which is an equivalent within Mac OS, and then if you don't have access for whatever system you're building on to either the systrace or a seatbelt type of solution, just using R-limit. And I think I put a link into the release notes for OpenSSH version 5.9 that introduced this sandboxing, that also just that the release notes themselves just have a really nice overview of that. So I just point this out. This was a little bit over 10 years ago for sandboxing, about 20 years ago for the privilege separation. And I don't know if, Akira, we've also lost you again on talking about these types of low-level details, but I imagine that you perhaps use SSH or you have some other types of applications you deal with that should have either authentication mechanisms to them or just sandboxing and privilege separation that you'd want to implement.
Yeah, so I mean, at a very high level, right? What this reminds me of is a concept that I've learned probably in the past 6 to 8 months of the principle of least privilege, right? So, or environmental separation as well. So these are things that I'm just kind of getting my feet wet with of like, how does this actually work in practice? So for me, this was a good article just to be like, oh, okay, like this is how we have environment separation and why you would need to do that. And you can't just have everything in a big pool so that if one thing gets infected, then everything else gets infected. And so that was kind of what I took away with it, is kind of very rudimentary, like reinforcement of like this concept is important. I'm still a little bit stuck on the details though.
Yeah, well, I'd say I wouldn't worry too much about the details if you don't want to get into the C programming or the systems programming of Linux or Mac OS. So I wouldn't worry about that. What I will do is then now bring into making things better. We have a resignation from the OWASP board by Mark Curphey. So we covered, I think, at the end of the summer, Mark Curphey wrote an open letter about his platform running for OWASP, saying things he would love to see. Now he has chosen to step down in a very constructive manner, but essentially saying there's the changes that he wanted to see aren't going to happen with the sense of priority or urgency that he believes they should happen within OWASP. And it's something we've been covering for the last couple weeks. So I'm going to flip a virtual coin here and not look at the results and let John and Akira figure out who wants to tackle this one first with a response.
Akira?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I thought was interesting is that he's right. Like, we've been doing, like, this is what XSS is, this is what SQL injection is, this is what broken authentication is for a really long time. And I remember coming into this journey thinking, like, this is cool, but it's so isolated and it seems so removed from, like, how people write software. Like, I would personally much rather learn about, like, security vulnerabilities in Ruby on Rails or React, or, like, how to leverage frameworks so that I will have less vulnerable code, kind of like how we talked about earlier today with Josh. And I don't see a lot of that in OWASP right now. And I think that one of the things that Mark Curphey highlights here is that, yeah, we're having this disconnect of how software is actually being built and what vulnerabilities we need to focus on, and they're not necessarily like working together to form a cohesive narrative. One last thing I want to say is that I heard this interesting hot take a few days ago that AppSec teams are addicted to vulnerabilities. And I think that's kind of true, especially when you look at things like OWASP top 10 lists. It's just like we're thinking about the individual pieces, but the developers are not getting a sense of how this fits into a larger narrative of how they write code. It's just like, oh, just don't write code that causes a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Like, well, okay, how do I use React to not do that? So that was my hot take. John, what do you think?
I think that's interesting. I want to try and keep this tight because we've talked about this a good amount. But going back to the last half when we were talking with Josh, the concept there that I asked him of, like, who's the target for writing the book or the article or whoever else, I think it sort of comes back to this: who's the target of our top 10 lists at OWASP? And by that I mean, walking on eggshells. I don't know why, something happened to me. I had too much something. But when these things are being written, are they writing them for other security folks or security consultants, or are they writing them for developers? And I think that sort of that pivot, which we try to cover here a pretty good amount on the show, how do we help the developer, not the security person, is fairly important. I think it's unfortunate he had to step down. I get it. As we've talked through, we've been seeing these type of things across multiple different organizations. He made some comments about, like, vendors. part of me thinks you have to embrace that and actually get the vendors to come in and help more. The question is the struggle some folks have, particularly some of the older folks, myself included. Well, myself being an older folk, is there is concern that the vendors will then steer the projects in a way which benefits the vendor, not the community. I get that, but at the same time, we're seeing some. Anyways, that's that point. I'm not going to go down that path. But so I appreciate his work they did before, that he did this time. I know OWASP isn't going anywhere. I know they're not going to get that multi-million-dollar budget that he was hoping for last year. So there's a bit of all these different things in there. But yeah, if we keep pushing forward, we keep making improvements, and we'll sort of see how things go.
Indeed. And to Akira's point, too, we talked with, for example, Trail of Bits. They made some important points that they don't do pen testing or code reviews and just say, here are the 15 different bugs you've got. They do it in the sense of, here is an architecture change to make. Here's how to get rid of this class of vulns. And Akira, you were mentioning React. Rather than just tell people about the different types of cross-site scripting, make them memorize that, regurgitate it, let's use React, still be aware of the vulnerability, but make it both harder to do by default and very obvious if you do need to do it. They famously has the dangerously set inner HTML, which is very helpful for linters. So Josh would love to come through with a old school grep or a linter that'd be able to say, oh, you're using either the good pattern or here's the suspicious pattern. Thank you for being explicit about it. Do you want to re-review this code for any reason? That's a good thing. I think the only other aspect I'd add to this is that I am slowly falling onto that side of who's our audience and emphasizing developers, which is why I really enjoyed talking with Josh today and seeing something like the OWASP Top 10 as still useful for having a shared language. We should at least be able to talk about this is cross-site scripting, this is SQL injection, this is broken authentication. So we're using roughly the same language within the application security world to describe types of vulnerabilities and so on, rather than confusing people. And when we talk about threat models or things like that, but we don't need to, we shouldn't over-index on this is the only thing we're ever doing. And I think that's the best I can add to that. So, big breath. We hit on, I think, all the major articles I wanted to hit, and we'll lighten things up with perhaps one last one. Akira, we haven't mentioned ChatGPT. So for those of you who have been staring at that square on your bingo card and wondering what the heck we can join everyone else talking about this thing, Akira, go fill in that square for us.
Yeah, it's been, like 10 minutes and ChatGPT hasn't come up. That's insane. So this is kind of a silly little thing. A Google Chrome extension that essentially is ChatGPT branded can hijack people's Facebook accounts and create rogue admin accounts. What I thought was just interesting to highlight on this article, is I'll keep this very short because we're running very low on time, is TLDR. It's a Chrome extension that actually works, it actually does link you to ChatGPT, and at the same time, it will take your metadata and all your cookies and see if you have a sort of Facebook account of note or with a little notoriety. It will then put ads from your Facebook account, from your business account or whatever, for this browser extension, so people think it's coming from this legitimate business, they'll click on it, and so on and so forth, and thus the cycle continues. So long story short, when you're downloading browser extensions, please just make sure you actually trust the person that is creating them. What I will say is this browser extension was having 2,000 downloads a day, and Google just pulled it from their store. So it's going to be a bit of a mess trying to clean this one up.
Yeah, and to me, this isn't something new because of ChatGPT. This is just a great thing to highlight as you're doing to show people do these types of attacks and they go after the latest, coolest topics. ChatGPT tends to be one of them. And yes, it does use ChatGPT in the background, but it's not necessarily, it's no different in concept than we've seen this type of attack, credential harvesting, targeting high value, accounts, whether on Facebook, Twitter, etc., what have you. So I don't know, John, we just need to get your opinion on this to make sure you're still human and haven't been taken over by AI. So what have you got for
I'm
us?
still human, and I'll say, just to make sure that you are safe when you are downloading those extensions off Chrome, always go and check the REST-bomb. I mean, that proves that I'm a real human being.
That indeed does. With that, I want to say thank you, John. Thank you, Kira, for joining us. Thank you, everyone else as well. Before we leave, I'll depart because we must return to news and limerick style for libcurl, celebrating the 25th anniversary, because an anecdote of mine is that this one time when my browser did die, I thought, why not give libcurl a try? I typed -- help all and then watched as a wall of 200 plus options scrolled by. So thank you, Daniel, for libcurl. It's up to almost 256 command line options. So we look forward to seeing how many that will be in another 25 years. Listeners, please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes. And speaking of wonderful things that have come out of Sweden, check out Running Wild by Robert Parker. With that, we'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.